I knew adulthood was a scam the morning my neighbor called the police because my dog was staring at her yoga. There I was, 7 a.m., standing in my boxers, with a lukewarm cup of black coffee, and somehow my golden retriever had become the greatest threat to peace in Boca Raton. That was the moment I stopped seeing Brenda as annoying and started seeing her for what she really was, a tiny suburban dictator in pastel activewear. If you've never been to Boca Raton, picture this grass so green, it looks fake palm trees standing at attention, and homeowners associations that act like constitutional monarchies. I bought my house for the backyard. Big space, good sun, plenty of room for Buster to run around. What I did not realize was that the woman next door treated neighborhood life like a black ops surveillance mission. Her name was Brenda Vance, vice president of the HOA. Between our yards sat a 4-foot chain-link fence, the only kind the HOA allowed. On her side, spotless patio and morning yoga. On my side, Buster, 90 pounds of golden fluff, no inner life whatsoever. Just elevator music and a sincere belief that squirrels were a matter of national security. That Tuesday, I stepped outside to grab the paper and saw Brenda twisted into some impossible pose while Buster sat by the fence perfectly still staring into her yard. "David," she snapped, "are you seeing this?" I took a sip of coffee. "Seeing what? Your beast is menacing me. He's been staring at me for 20 minutes. It's an invasion of privacy." In reality, Buster was locked onto a fat squirrel living in her palm tree. But I looked at Brenda's face, red with outrage over the gaze of a dog, and I made a choice. "Brenda," I said, calm as a funeral director, "you're absolutely right. I'll handle it." She blinked. Usually we argued for 10 minutes before she threatened to fine me for grass-related sins. Instead, I called Buster inside, opened my laptop, and decided if she wanted absurdity, I would give her absurdity so perfect it deserved a plaque. That night, I ordered oversized mirrored aviator goggles for dogs. Then I bought neon poster board and a black marker. Next morning, right on schedule, Brenda rolled out her yoga mat at 6:45. At 6:46, I let Buster out wearing the aviators. He walked to his spot by the fence, sat down, and faced her yard like a retired federal agent. Then I zip-tied a sign to the chain link. "Blind dog, please do not distract with yoga." The silence that followed was beautiful. Birds in the palms, distant sprinklers, a squirrel chewing. Then Brenda exploded. "Are you insane? Degenerative condition?" I said, taking the slowest sip of coffee in recorded history. Came on suddenly. "Vet says he's highly sensitive to abrupt movement, especially bad Pilates." "It's yoga." Buster sat there in those mirrored lenses with his tongue hanging out, looking like a narcotics officer who'd been hit in the head with a loaf of bread. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Brenda called the police. 2 officers showed up. Officer Ramirez looked 1 complaint away from retirement, and Officer Davies looked like he still got carded buying aspirin. I met them at the gate and told them dead serious, "You're going to want to see this." They followed me around back expecting danger and found Buster in mirrored aviators chewing a dandelion beside that glowing neon sign. Ramirez stopped, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and asked, "Sir, is that dog wearing sunglasses?" "Their prescription," I said. Davies broke first. Ramirez held it together for about 3 seconds longer. Then Brenda came storming out, yelling that the dog was hiding his eyes so she couldn't tell when he was watching her. Ramirez listened, looked at Buster rolling in the grass for belly rubs, then said, "Ma'am, staring is not a crime. Putting sunglasses on a dog is not a crime. Please stop calling 911 over this." I figured that would embarrass her enough to end it. Instead, she pointed 1 manicured finger at me and hissed, "By Friday, you won't have a yard left to put that mud in. I will bury you in violations." That threat sounded real. 2 days later, I opened my mailbox and found a certified letter from the HOA. Buried under legal oatmeal was the actual threat. I was being ordered to install an approved visual barrier to obscure the sightline of my nuisance animal. If I failed, I'd be fined $250 a day. A nuisance animal. I looked down at Buster asleep on the kitchen tile upside down, drooling into the grout like a drunk uncle at Thanksgiving, and I laughed out loud. So I drove to the HOA office, asked for a permit to build a 6-foot privacy fence, and Brenda appeared from the back like she'd been waiting for her entrance. "Denied," she said. "You haven't even seen the paperwork." "Doesn't matter. HOA rules prohibit solid fences over 4 feet. I stared at her. "So you're ordering me to build a visual barrier, and also forbidding me from building anything that actually works as a visual barrier?" Her smile widened. "Correct. You'll have to keep the dog inside. Permanently." That was the moment the whole thing snapped into focus. It was never about staring. It was never even about Buster. It was about control. Brenda had built a perfect trap, create a rule, make compliance impossible, then punish the person you don't like for failing. That's the ugliest kind of power because it doesn't come at you honest. It dresses itself up as procedure and waits for you to suffocate politely. I went home and spent 6 straight hours digging through statutes, city codes, zoning, language, anything I could find. Fences, hedges, pergolas, temporary structures, every normal route was blocked. Then buried in an ancient forum for ham radio weirdos, I found it. The FCCOTARD rule over the air reception devices. Federal law protecting satellite dishes and antennas used to receive video programming. If the equipment was real functional and installed on property. I controlled the HOA could not stop me, fine me, or force me to hide it if that interfered with reception. I didn't need a fence. I needed telecommunications infrastructure. That's when the twist walked in wearing work boots and cigarette smoke. Chuck. I'd met Chuck months earlier in a sports bar while he was loudly cursing a city inspector named Gary. I dug out his card, Chuck's custom builds, no job too weird, and called him. When I explained that I needed a federally protected spite structure in Whispering Pines, he went dead silent, then said, "Son, I'm bringing tools." Chuck rolled up the next morning in a rusted Ford truck with 2 helpers. Tiny, who looked like he could bench press a refrigerator, and Skylar, a twitchy wiring kid. I laid out the plan: 12 1-meter satellite dishes mounted in overlapping rows on steel poles, fully wired, fully functional, forming a 6-foot opaque wall along the property line. Chuck took a drag off his cigarette and said, "You are a disturbed man," and I respect that. At exactly 6 a.m., the legal construction hour, Tiny fired up a gas auger so loud it sounded like a helicopter dying in a blender. Dirt flew everywhere. Brenda burst out onto her patio in a pink robe, curlers in her hair, face covered in white clay mask, looking like a furious haunted cupcake. "What are you doing?" she screamed. Chuck stepped forward with his clipboard. "Federally protected telecommunications installation, ma'am. Please stand back." For the next few hours, my backyard turned into a war zone of malicious compliance. Steel poles went into concrete. Satellite dishes got bolted on in 2 staggered rows. Skylar wired every single one into tuner boxes in a weatherproof junction box. Then he plugged in a little monitor, and some local public access fishing show came through clear as day. Legit, functional, untouchable. But the real masterpiece came next. The night before, I'd had a friend print a weatherproof vinyl mural in sections. Once the dishes were up, we wrapped the backs facing Brenda's patio with one giant panoramic image of Buster's face wearing those mirrored aviators. 40 feet of dog. Photorealistic. Slightly warped by the curve so it looked even more cursed. And right as we finished, the cavalry arrived, Brenda in a navy pantsuit, Arthur the HOA president, and Gary the code enforcer, who took one look at Chuck and muttered, "God help me." Brenda nearly vibrated with triumph. "Look at it," she yelled. "It's an illegal fence." Arthur started reading off violations. Then he tried to hand me a stop work order. I smiled and handed him 15 highlighted pages of federal law. "This," I said, "tapping the stack is an active over-the-air reception device array protected by the FCCOTARD rule. You cannot restrict it, you cannot fine me. And if you try, my next call is to the FCC." Gary inspected the poles, the wiring, the signal feed. Then he sighed. "He's right," Gary said. I watched Arthur deflate in real time. Brenda kept insisting it was a spite fence. Gary kept repeating, "It functions. It's legal. I can't touch it." And just like that, her whole little kingdom cracked. Arthur turned on Brenda right there in the street. Told her she'd forced the issue. Told her he wasn't about to fight the federal government over a dog dispute. Then he got in his Mercedes and left. Gary left. Chuck lit another cigarette. Tiny and Skylar sat on the tailgate eating sandwiches like they had front row tickets to a fight. And Brenda just stood there, staring up at a 40-foot federally protected wall of satellite dishes, wrapped in the giant mirrored face of the dog she tried to banish. I have never seen defeat land so hard on a person. Then she got in her Lexus and drove away. Buster slept through most of it under the junction box, snoring like a man with no enemies. I scratched him behind the ears and looked up at that ridiculous wall, and I remember thinking how strange justice can be. Sometimes it wears a suit, sometimes it carries a badge, and sometimes it shows up as a golden retriever in aviators backed by telecommunications law. That mess taught me something too. People who love power almost always pretend they're just protecting order. They hide behind bylaws and procedure, whatever makes control sound respectable. But there's always a moment when they forget the truth. The rules they weaponize are not always the biggest rules in the room. And when that day comes, karma doesn't always arrive looking noble. Sometimes it arrives looking absolutely ridiculous. And that's what makes it beautiful. Brenda wanted a visual barrier. I gave her one she'll probably see in her nightmares. Now tell me this, when somebody uses rules to bully and corner another person, is beating them with a loophole justice, or just a smarter version of revenge? Tell me where you land in the comments, and if you've ever dealt with an HOA tyrant, a power-hungry neighbor, or a moment where karma hit harder than you expected. Share that story too.